The Delcarith consensus ruled three-quarters of the Orion Arm, their fleet spanning millions of light-years with seamless precision. For over 10,000 solar cycles, their dominion remained unchallenged, not by brute force but by the infallibility of their logic. Among the elder species, emotion had long been discarded as an evolutionary hindrance, an ancient relic of lesser beings. Thought was pure, decisions flawless, progress inevitable. So when the signal from Sol system reached the edges of their outposts carried by primitive radio waves, it was filed and forgotten, deemed irrelevant. A new sentient race had barely stirred awake. Their first fumbling steps into the void warranted neither caution nor curiosity. The human race, struggling under fractured nations and warring ideologies, hardly seemed a threat. They launched crude satellites, stumbled onto the moon, bickered among themselves, and filled their histories with passion, regret, rage, and triumph. The Delcarith observed only briefly before assigning them a classification: proto-civilization, negligible. It was a mistake. Years turned into decades and the humans changed. They unified not under a single flag but under a shared urgency. Earth was dying, its blue oceans stained with plastic, its forests gasping under metal and smoke. Survival demanded transcendence. The world governments collapsed one after another, not through warfare but through mass disobedience, coordinated uprisings, and leaders who no longer clung to old power structures. In their place rose the conquered of Earth, a decentralized yet fiercely coordinated union bound by an unspoken covenant. Humanity would not perish within the womb of its mother planet. They would ascend. In the heart of Antarctica, where ancient glaciers split and bled freshwater into warming seas, humanity's first true interstellar vessel was born. Dauntless was more than metal and mathematics. It was a testament to a species that refused to surrender. It was anger forged into purpose, hope hammered into steel. Their first attempts at faster-than-light travel shattered dozens of prototype ships, killing thousands. The grief did not slow them. If anything, it accelerated their hunger. By the time they carved their first warp tunnel through spacetime, the Delcarith had moved to more significant matters: border skirmishes with the Voral and the quiet rebellion simmering on the Talar Reach. The first human expedition into the stars was supposed to be a reconnaissance mission. But when the Dauntless emerged in a foreign sector, drifting above an abandoned Delcarith mining outpost on Helix IV, everything changed. Commander Helena Voss, a veteran of the last water wars, stood on the bridge of Dauntless, her gloved hand brushing the holographic map projected before her. The structures below were not ruins of time, but freshly deserted. Lights still flickered in the abandoned hallways. Mining drones hung frozen in the vacuum like insects trapped in amber. Something scared them off, Voss said, her voice hard as the steel under her boots. Or lured them away, replied Dr. Keiji Tanaka, chief science officer and once a professor of theoretical physics at the University of New Copenhagen. They knew so little about the greater galaxy, but one thing had already become clear: the older races had grown complacent. They had dismissed entire emotional spectrums that still burned inside human veins. Fear, love, wrath, determination, these were not flaws to be excised, they were arsenals. The conquered authorized further incursions, small at first, cautious, but everywhere humanity went, they found traces of the great powers, always logical, always cold, and increasingly always absent. The Delcarith eventually noticed. A delegation was dispatched, not a fleet, no weapons, just envoys aboard a sleek silvered vessel that dwarfed the human cruiser in elegance if not in mass. They materialized without warning above Mars, broadcasting messages in hundreds of languages simultaneously, their syntax perfect, their diction emotionless. "We welcome your ascension," the Delcarith lead envoy announced, a being of silvered membranes and filamented light. "We offer integration into the consensus. Compliance is optimal." The conquered council met in a hastily assembled summit deep beneath Olympus Mons. Helena Voss attended, flanked by Earth's brightest tacticians, diplomats, and strategists. Against the cold logic of the Delcarith, humanity had no chance of winning a war of machines and mathematics. But war was not decided by algorithms alone. Ambassador Luis Ortega, born in the favelas of drowned Rio de Janeiro, stood before the Delcarith emissaries with a simple answer: no. The Delcarith did not react. They did not rage, threaten, or cajole. Their cognitive frameworks deemed the refusal irrational. They departed without ceremony. Within a month, Delcarith drones began appearing in human sectors, disabling satellites, corrupting communications, disabling supply routes. There were no declarations of war, no grand battles, just a slow, suffocating constriction. At first, humanity responded with technology, attempting to match Delcarith precision with ingenuity. Their ships were modular, their AI learning at an exponential rate, but still, they were outpaced. That was when humanity turned inward and found its weapon. It started with the Neural Resonance Project, a secret division buried under the New Toronto ruins where psychologists, neuroscientists, and military historians gathered under one forbidden hypothesis: that emotion was not noise in the system, it was another system altogether. Rage enhanced reflexes beyond predictive modeling, love fueled sacrifice past logical thresholds, despair birthed innovation no simulation could anticipate, hope turned defeat into last stands and sometimes last stands into victories. The project synthesized neural enhancers not to suppress emotion, but to amplify it under controlled conditions. Human pilots, soldiers, and engineers began operating with emotional resonance woven into their very neural pathways. The Delcarith encountered these new adversaries first at the Battle of Corine Rift. A Delcarith siege force, numbering in the tens of thousands, moved to erase the newly established human outpost. It should have been a slaughter. Instead, the humans fought like wildfire incarnate. Their tactics mutated mid-battle, erratic yet terrifyingly effective. Ships sacrificed themselves to create openings for vengeance strikes. Fighters wove chaotic patterns no AI could predict. Death only seemed to ignite more ferocity. In the blackened aftermath of the rift, 6 Delcarith fleets lay in ruin. Humanity had lost 80% of their forces, but they had won. For the first time in 10 millennia, the consensus hesitated. And as humanity rebuilt, they began to whisper a new name across the stars: the Children of Ash. In the hushed aftermath of Corine Rift, humanity understood that survival alone was not enough. They needed to evolve faster than their enemies could react. Across 1,000 hidden arsenals and orbital foundries, the conquered abandoned the slow refinements of past doctrines. Progress became brutal, immediate, and unrelenting. The Delcarith, meanwhile, convened a summit of the Primes, a gathering reserved only for threats deemed civilization-ending. Their architects of probability constructed scenarios, each colder than the last. Human behavior defied every expectation. Statistical projections fractured into chaos whenever emotional resonance entered the battlefield. Some Delcarith proposed extermination protocols: planetary sterilization, entropy storms, viral cognitive collapse. Others argued for disengagement, theorizing that humanity would self-destruct if left to their own volatility. In the end, the consensus chose containment. A lattice of interdiction fields was deployed around the Sol system, invisible but impenetrable. Humanity, the Delcarith concluded, would be imprisoned by the very stars they had so recently conquered. They underestimated how humans treated cages. The conquered responded not with rage but with ingenuity. Wormhole manipulation, thought impossible for such a young species, became a fevered pursuit. Experiments ripped holes in spacetime across the shadowed moons of Saturn. Entire labs were lost, consumed by runaway singularities or phased out of existence. The losses were mourned but never allowed to slow the tide. In less than a decade, Project Catapult bore fruit. Using focused gravitational slingshot arrays, human ships began vanishing from Sol, reappearing light-years beyond the interdiction zone. The conquered had slipped the noose. And they were no longer content with survival, they were ready to strike. The first counteroffensive was code-named Operation Scorchwake. Helena Voss, now Supreme Marshal of the conquered defense, stood once more aboard Dauntless, her flesh marred by old wounds, her mind sharpened by battles few had survived. Beside her, Captain Rail Anders, a product of the Neural Resonance Project's second generation, carried himself like a living weapon barely restrained. Their target was clear: the shard worlds of Tellan V, a primary fuel source for Delcarith fleets operating across the Orion frontier. Human forces struck without warning. Plasma lances rained upon orbital stations. Neural resonance strike teams, their emotions synchronized and amplified, infiltrated surface facilities, planting destabilizers directly into the crystalline substrates that powered Delcarith war engines. Within 72 hours, the shardworlds became graveyards. The Delcarith counterattack was merciless. Entire divisions of memory architects deployed, trying to crush human command structures through targeted memory erasure. They failed. Neural resonance allowed human soldiers to shield their minds not with logic but with emotional entrenchment, building mental bastions around memories of lost loved ones, of victories earned, of betrayals overcome. Every strike made humanity stronger. Every atrocity sharpened their resolve into a weapon more lethal than any Delcarith could model. Other species began to notice. The Vorhaste, Ancient, and Serpentine watched from their lattice cities with unease. The Zalshar Covenant, whose hive minds once debated the theoretical potential of emotion but abandoned it, found themselves questioning millennia of doctrine. In the bleeding ruins of once invincible consensus holdings, a new whisper traveled along communication nexuses and clandestine meetings. The humans were changing the game. Still, for all their victories, humanity teetered on the edge of annihilation. Their forces were scattered, their resources finite, their alliances non-existent. Against the raw might of the consensus, they were embers in a hurricane. The Delcarith, at last recognizing that containment had failed, escalated to full-spectrum warfare. Planetary purges began, not of Earth, but of every colony that had shown even the slightest human influence. Worlds that had once marveled at human audacity now found themselves silenced, sterilized into sterile wastelands. The message was clear: association with humanity was death. Helena Voss convened the first conclave of the Shattered, gathering surviving leaders from human enclaves across a dozen systems. The conclave was chaotic, driven by survivors too angry to be rational, too scarred to trust easily. Some wanted to retreat to Sol, rebuild, wait out the fury of the elder species. Others demanded immediate retaliation, genocide against the Delcarith. Voss listened in silence until the arguments burned themselves out. Then she spoke. "We will not retreat into oblivion," she said. "We will not burn ourselves hollow for revenge. We will forge a new front, not of fear but of defiance." The strategy she proposed was madness to many, but to those who had lived through Carini Rift, who had seen the impossible made real by sheer force of will, it was brilliance. Rather than defend, humanity would become uncatchable, ungovernable. Mobile strongholds, cities woven into starships, factories lashed to comet cores would traverse deep space in unpredictable patterns. They would seed new alliances, not through promises of order, but through the gift of something long thought impossible, the restoration of passion. The conquered was reborn not as an empire, but as a storm. They called it the Exodus Armada. And as the first of these world ships unfurled its solar wings and dove into the abyss, carrying millions of souls wrapped in dreams and scars alike, the Delcarith watched from their fortified domains, and for the first time in their endless existence, they doubted. Doubt was an emotion. The first crack in their dominion had appeared. The Exodus Armada carved new scars into the fabric of the galaxy. Moving faster than predictions could track, splitting and reuniting without pattern, humanity became a myth wrapped in plasma and fury. Each world they touched was changed. Some fell into silence after the humans left, others rose in open revolt against Delcarith control. In response, the Delcarith constructed the Sable Net, a hunting lattice meant to ensnare the human fleets through brute force gravitational anchors and predictive hyperspace interdiction. Yet it was as if humanity sensed the traps before they were sprung. No model could anticipate them because the core variable was absent from Delcarith calculus: emotion. Rage twisted plans into sudden assaults. Hope seeded impossible evasions. Grief hardened retreats into invincible last stands. Neural resonance had become not just a battlefield enhancement, but the skeleton of a new human culture, one that defied the sterile, ancient thinking of the consensus. Far from the front lines on the crystalline bastion world of Vol Murath, the consensus leaders gathered in a desperate effort to reframe the war. Their brightest strategists pored over terabytes of combat data, trying to map the pattern. Again and again they failed. Emotional entanglement fractured every algorithm. The Delcarith realized too late that they had bred themselves into a corner. In excising emotion, they had severed the ability to adapt under irrational circumstances. What had once been their perfection had now become their cage. Meanwhile, deep within the roving heart of the Exodus Armada, humanity was evolving. The first emissaries were born. Individuals with neural resonance so powerful that it bled into the very space around them, influencing friend and foe alike. Their presence could rally shattered squadrons, ignite mass uprisings on subjugated worlds, or paralyze enemy command units with paroxysms of doubt and fear. They were not officers or elected leaders, they were forces of nature. Captain Rael Anders, once merely a blade in Helena Voss' arsenal, became the first recognized emissary. On the ice world of Vora's Reach, he led a force of barely 5,000 against a Delcarith siege group of nearly 2 million. No grand plan, no overwhelming firepower, just the raw gravitational pull of unbreakable spirit. By the end of the campaign, the Delcarith had abandoned the system entirely. They could not quantify the event. Their historians simply filed it as an anomaly. The galaxy shuddered at the implications. Species that had for millennia modeled survival through rigid hierarchies now saw the tide turning. The Vorhaste, ancient and coiled in their hollowed asteroids, began sending clandestine envoys to the Exodus Armada. The Zalshar hive clusters, once arrogantly separate, now petitioned for access to neural resonance protocols. It was not alliance through coercion, it was awakening. Helena Voss knew the stakes. She had aged far beyond her years, the resonance burning her from within. She spent long nights aboard Dauntless, staring out at fields of stars that had once been beyond reach, knowing that each light marked a choice. Should humanity become a conqueror, a liberator, a destroyer? The old debates of Earth echoed faintly in her mind, but the choice was made clearer each time another world fell silent under Delcarith purges. The Conquered Council expanded, incorporating alien voices. The first resonance accords were signed aboard the drifting Citadel Halcyon's End, binding humans and non-humans alike to the principle that emotion, honest, dangerous, untamed, was a right and a weapon both. In retaliation, the Delcarith unleashed the Winter Protocol. Entire sectors were flash-frozen into inert quantum stasis. Civilizations caught within these fields found themselves trapped in temporal coffins, unable to think, to feel, to move. The Delcarith believed it a final solution. No emotion could survive absolute stillness. But humans had already shifted the battlefield. Rather than fight sector by sector, the Exodus Armada launched catalyst strikes, surgical missions designed not to conquer but to inspire. A single ship landing on a subjugated world could seed rebellion that no lattice of force could contain. Where once the Delcarith wove webs of dominance, now those webs tore themselves apart from within. No algorithm could map passion's contagion. Helena Voss summoned a council of the emissaries. There were few of them, each scarred by the terrible price their gifts demanded. Rael Anders stood among them, his once youthful face now a mask of haunted determination. "We have broken the illusion of inevitability," she said. "Now we must break the consensus itself." It was not merely strategy, it was belief. Humanity had become a beacon to the oppressed, a whispered proof that even the most monolithic powers could bleed. Yet victory demanded sacrifice. Operation Starfall was drafted in secret, a plan to strike at the heart of Delcarith dominion, not with fleets or dreadnoughts, but with a single act of emotional resonance so massive that it would fracture the cognitive lattice binding the Delcarith consensus together. It would require an amplifier beyond anything yet built. The construction began in the broken remains of the Charon Nexus, a place already scarred by the sins of the old powers. Tens of thousands labored to create the core, a fusion of human neural science and alien crystal harmonics, tuned to the chaotic frequency of emotion itself. The weapon would not destroy planets. It would awaken them. As the core neared completion, the Delcarith gathered their final fleets, a storm of silvered death sweeping across the stars, converging on the last known coordinates of the Exodus Armada. Helena Voss looked upon the battle maps and felt no fear, only purpose. The tide was coming. And humanity, the children of Ash, would either light the galaxy with a new fire or be extinguished trying. The Delcarith Armada darkened entire constellations as it moved. Hundreds of fleets arrayed with mathematical perfection, countless vessels arranged like a knife poised to carve through the center of all resistance. They came not as conquerors, but as eradicators, determined to excise the anomaly of humanity from the galaxy's equation. Inside the drifting forge worlds of the Exodus Armada, final preparations began. The core was suspended within the wrecked bones of the Charon Nexus, a sphere of crystalline alloy veined with living neural networks. It pulsed faintly, a heartbeat waiting for ignition. Around it, the conquered fleets formed a broken ring, not to shield it, but to give it time. Time bought with blood. Helena Voss convened with the emissaries one last time aboard the Dauntless, its old hull bearing new scars from battles no history books had yet recorded. No illusions clouded their counsel. Many would not see another sunrise. Rael Anders, voice steady with the weight of millions, delivered the final plan. The conquered would not attempt to destroy the Delcarith Armada. Such an act was beyond their means. Instead, they would hold the line long enough for the core to unleash its pulse. A resonance so deep, so overwhelming, it would tear the sterile lattice of the consensus apart. The emissaries would lead the defense, broadcasting waves of amplified emotion through specialized command ships, the echelon carriers. These beacons would distort enemy targeting arrays, fracture Delcarith decision matrices, and bleed chaos into otherwise perfect formations. It was no longer a war of numbers. It was a war of will. When the Delcarith arrived, the stars themselves seemed to recoil. Waves of directed energy fire swept the outer perimeter, vaporizing human vanguard ships in brutal succession. Hulls cracked, air ignited, and death reigned. But the conquered did not break. Echelon carriers poured streams of amplified rage and defiance into the void. Human frigates danced along trajectories that defied probability, weaving between Delcarith beams with suicidal grace. Infected by the resonant fields, Delcarith formations began to hesitate, drift, and fracture. Within the Nexus, engineers and scientists prayed to no gods, only to each other as they calibrated the final sequences. Neural feedback storms battered their minds, bleeding dreams and nightmares into the control systems. Still, they endured. Minutes dragged into hours. The battlefield became a pyre. Emissaries burned like living stars. Some were consumed entirely, their neural matrices collapsing under the strain of channeling so much raw emotion. Yet every death magnified the signal, every sacrifice pulling the enemy deeper into fragmentation. Above the core, Helena Voss took the final command seat. Her neural implants interfaced directly with the resonance amplifiers. Memories flooded her, memories not just of her own life but of all humanity. The first awkward steps on Luna, the burning cities of the water wars, the soaring hope of dauntless first flight. Lost triumph, fury, love. She bore it all. And then, as the armada closed in for the kill, she unleashed the core. The pulse tore across the void. Invisible to the eye but catastrophic to the mind, it slammed into the Delcarith fleets with the force of a collapsing reality. Cognitive lattices, once seamless, shattered into a billion fragmented consciousnesses. Command structures imploded. Ships spun out of control, some colliding in blinding detonations, others simply drifting powerless. Across the Delcarith domains, entire planetary networks screamed into silence. Memory archives cracked open. Dormant instincts, buried for eons, twitched awake. Emotion flooded back into a race that had long since declared itself free of such contaminants. Fear, grief, wonder, madness. In the chaos, the Exodus Armada surged forward not to annihilate but to seed. Landing parties descended onto crippled Delcarith vessels, not with weapons drawn but with open hands, offering a choice: embrace the storm of rebirth or remain chained to a broken past. Some Delcarith chose annihilation, detonating their own cores rather than confront the tidal wave of feeling inside them. Others surrendered without even understanding the word. Still others fell to their knees, sobbing sounds they had no words to describe. The consensus shattered. Not in glorious battle, not in some apocalyptic finale, but in an awakening so profound that it rewrote the destiny of an entire civilization. In the aftermath, Helena Voss lay dying aboard Dauntless, her mind burned hollow by the core's pulse. Rael Anders knelt beside her, the others forming a silent ring of respect. "You finished it," Rael said, voice cracking under the weight of all they had lost and won. Helena smiled, a small human thing. "No," she whispered, "we just began." The lights of dying ships and newborn fires reflected in her eyes as they closed for the last time. Across the ruins of the battlefield, new signals sparked, messages not of conquest but of yearning. The galaxy was changing. And humanity stood at the heart of that storm. In the fractured silence that followed the fall of the Delcarith consensus, the galaxy trembled with possibility. For the first time in recorded history, no single will reign supreme. The vacuum left behind did not collapse into anarchy, not immediately. Instead, it filled with 1,000 voices rising, tentative, confused, but unbroken. The Exodus Armada became the foundation of a new epoch. No longer fugitives or insurgents, humanity transformed itself into the custodians of resonance. They moved not as conquerors, but as stewards, guiding shattered worlds toward rebirth. Their fleets became lifelines, carrying engineers, teachers, and diplomats alongside warriors ready to defend the fragile flame they had ignited. The resonance accords expanded, binding an ever-growing web of species not through dominance, but through the shared right to feel, to choose, to dream. Where the Delcarith had ruled through sterile inevitability, humanity taught the value of chaos, of conflict tempered by empathy, of strength guided by sorrow and joy alike. Among the ruins of Val Murath, once the shining capital of Delcarith authority, Rael Anders led the first assembly of the Free Nexus. A council composed of humans, Vorhaes sages, Zalshar synapse clusters, and dozens of others once considered incapable of true governance. Together, they debated not how to impose order, but how to build trust across difference. The great halls, once cold and pristine, now thrummed with overlapping voices. Translations sputtered, misunderstandings flared, arguments erupted, yet no one was silenced. Every voice, no matter how strange or raw, was given space. It was imperfect. It was alive. Rael stood on the council floor, scarred from battle and burdened with memories no mind should carry. He spoke not as a conqueror, but as a witness. "We are not gods," he said, his voice carrying through the vast chamber. "We are not saviors, we are survivors, and if we have one lesson to offer, it is this: emotion is not a flaw, it is the forge from which all true strength is born." The council ratified the Charter of Resonant Sentience, a declaration that no being would again be stripped of the right to feel, to fight for dreams no algorithm could quantify. Not all accepted the new order willingly. Fractures appeared. Former Delcarith loyalists formed enclaves, desperate to reconstruct the sterile lattice of thought they had known. Some species, seeing opportunity in the chaos, launched their own bids for power. The custodians did not respond with the old hammer of annihilation. Instead, they wove networks of alliance, of culture, of shared myth. Where weapons failed, they sent storytellers. Where resistance flared, they sent teachers armed with the chaotic brilliance of emotional resonance. Bit by bit, world by world, a new galactic fabric began to emerge. One stitched together not by fear but by choice. Years passed. Helena Voss' name became legend, though no monuments were raised in her honor at her request. She lived instead in the songs sung aboard the roaming city ships, in the mottos etched into the hulls of new vessels born under alien suns, in the dreams whispered across nebulae still heavy with the dust of war. The core that had shattered the consensus was never used again. Instead, it remained sealed within the Charon Nexus, a silent guardian, a reminder that the greatest weapons were not built to destroy, but to awaken. As for humanity, they did not claim thrones or carve out empires. They scattered among the stars not as masters, but as catalysts, forever carrying with them the fire that no force, no matter how ancient or logical, could ever fully contain. Among distant constellations, new children were born, human, Vorhaste, Zalshar, and hybrids of species that had once barely acknowledged each other's existence. They grew up not fearing their emotions, but wielding them as navigators wield stars. And so the galaxy changed. No longer a cold machine grinding forward without end. Now it burned, danced, wept, and roared. A living tapestry of passions and dreams, stitched together by the most unpredictable force the stars had ever known. Humanity had been dismissed. Humanity had been underestimated. And through the one thing no elder species had thought to master, they had reshaped the destiny of 1,000 worlds. Their weapon was not steel. It was the beating heart. It was the unbroken will. It was emotion unleashed, untamed, eternal.